1976. Some thought of it as an ugly scandal. Others saw it as a passing fad. It undoubtedly produced a great deal of rubbish. But equally, there's no doubt that it brought to rock music a much-needed injection of energy. It's very direct, often what could even be called foul-mouthed expression of experience in a specifically English youth voice challenged the conventional cliches, which had grown fat and rosy on the success of the 60s. Its straightforwardness attacked the growing pretensions of many supposedly progressive bands and rattled the established superstars, some of whom began to appear as rather aimless dinosaurs. And finally, punk created a new audience for live music in pubs and clubs, and perhaps most importantly for the industry, led to the setting up of smaller, independent record labels who showed it was possible to make records easily and cheaply outside the gilt-edged studios of the big, powerful corporations. Most of the original punk bands have now been absorbed into the mainstream of the music business, or, some would say, sold out. But the punk eruption has seeded an enormous amount of diverse activity on small-scale label level. Every major city now has its own labels and its own bands. In this grassroots activity, outside the big music business, there's a continued adherence to the punk ideal, direct expression and willingness to experiment. We wanted to find the nerve of it, raw as it is. Rock journalist Simon Frith worked with our own researcher, and eventually we decided to bring you a report on Rough Trade.
This is a song for a friend of mine who got killed back in Belfast. This is called Wasted Life. I could be a soldier, go out there and fight to save this land. Be a paper soldier, paramilitary gun in hand. I won't be a soldier, I won't take the orders from the war. Stop them fucking army, kill it with my ideal fight. Everyone wish my life, they wanna wish my time, they wanna wish my life, and they stole it away. I'm not gonna retake it, say it if I don't try, I just can't win. Tell that story many times before, every time I do it out the door. Till they come up to me with a different kind of strangle face. I can see the connection with another time and another place. They ain't got it of their life, but they think that they're a master race. Then I've been my blood fashion, but I'm buried and given life of grace. Everyone wish my life, wanna wish my time, wanna wish my life, and they stole it away. What I wanna do, wanna wish my life, wanna wish my time, wish my life, and they stole it away.
Stiff Little Fingers sing about growing up in Belfast. I think they express more exuberantly than anyone else the punk ideal. Anybody can get up on stage and sing about their lives.
We have all the graveyards gone.
Punk as street fashion has faded. Its protest has been absorbed into rock and roll history. But as a result of the upheaval it caused, there are more people making music now than ever before. The most important centre for this new generation of do-it-yourself musicians is just off the Portobello Road, in a record shop called Rough Trade. Rough Trade opened as a record shop in 1976 and soon became well known for its adventurous stock of new wave and reggae music. From the beginning, Rough Trade was unusual, not just for its musical policy, but but also because it brought to the Portobello Road a new breed of hippie idealism.
You know, I've always bought records all my life, and I love music. And I was in the States for quite a long time. When I came back to London, I didn't feel like there was anywhere that I wanted to go particularly. So I thought, well, if there's nowhere to go, well, I have to start somewhere to go. As simple as that, really. I mean, I started the shop on the basis that a record shop could be something a lot more than just a place where you bought records, as though you were going into a chemist. The shop was set up in a way which would encourage people to stay for a while and to talk, sit down, I mean, just by putting a table in the middle of the floor, those kind of things. So the shop was stocked with the kind of music that I personally really like. I mean, at that time, if you'd have walked into Rough Trade at that time, it would have been, you would have thought, well, it's, I hope anyway, it's a fairly well-stocked record shop. Well, it had a lot of reggae in it. Perhaps that was one thing that differentiated it.
I came into Rough Trade as an outsider. You know, to me, punk music was just spitting and vomiting and people were looking funny. And personally, the only one type of music I like was reggae music. Since I've been here, there's some of the stuff I like. You know, some of the new wave stuff I really do think is good. If someone's a punk and their parents will say, what are you doing? What is Mrs. Jones going to say? The same way people say about the Rastas, and their parents do the same thing, and they're both trying to get back at society.
Entertainment is nearly always in this culture a means of escaping the violence that exists in society. The incitement of violence, you know, exists in looking across the road and seeing the environment that people have to live in. The music is not full of fantasies and ideal worlds and utopias, you know, based on, you know, 3-hour symphonies. It's actually something that's very real. People seem to be less afraid to stand up and say, this is me, and to actually say, well, okay, this is me, but in actual fact, I'm not really very happy with me. I mean, I'm pretty useless, and I'm feeling pretty frustrated. And I'm fed up with pretending that I'm all right.
How did I become a musician? Well, I'd always played other instruments, but it was like classically trained at school, and I played violin and piano, and I took grades, but I hated it. I just did it because my parents made me. And then I didn't play anything for about 5 years, and the saxophone I'd always loved. My father always used to play jazz records, and it's the only thing I took up sort of at my own incentive. I really liked it, and I went to this guy who lives in Willesden Green, and he's a proper jazz musician and everything, lives in a slum, got 12 wives, 12 kids, all this stuff. And just went to see him every Sunday, and he taught me. And then I just practiced on my own for about a year. Then I answered a Melody Maker ad, and that was X-Ray Specs. Although we rehearsed a bit before we actually did the gigs, by the time we did our first gig, it was still so sort of, oh, I don't know what's going to happen next. But all the time I knew I wanted to form my own band, sort of even before X-Ray Specs. X-Ray Specs. I wanted to do a single to keep me going till I could form a band. So I had some material which I'd written about a year before, and I took a tape along to Rough Trade, and I took it into Jeff. I said, I want to make a single. Yeah, go away, go away. And I came back the next day, and I think he must have been in a stupor or something. I said, fantastic. If I had their help or anything, I might just have sort of stayed at school, forgot about it completely.
Well, they phone us up and they say, well, we've just made this tape. Or they come through the door with a tape in hand and they say, will you listen to it? And in every case, we do listen to the tapes that they've brought in. I mean, we haven't turned anyone away. It's very, very difficult because a lot of tapes we get are excruciatingly bad. And a lot of people seem to think that the work that they've done themselves is really brilliant. And to be able to tell someone in a kind of non-personal and critical way is our job, I feel. But it's not always easy.
Rough Trade's expansion was rapid. In 3 years, they moved from selling records to distributing them, from advising groups to recording them, from publicising gigs to promoting them. They've become, in their range of interests, exactly equivalent to an established record company.
And Rough Trade has always responded to what's going on rather than actively going out and creating that situation. The reason that the shop developed into a mail order was we started to get 5, 10, 20 letters a day saying, can we buy this because we can't buy it at our local shop. So it made sense to start up a mail order. And then once the mail order had been going for a few months, then shops were writing in and saying, you know, I can't get records from normal wholesalers. Can I buy any excess stock you have, and so on and so on. So the wholesale developed on that line. The record company started when people came to us and said, look, I don't like dealing with normal record labels. Can you help us to, you know, make them, actually manufacture the records and get them out?
The way in which the music business approaches the problem of dealing with someone that's making music is, I think, whatever else is said to you, delineated by the fact that they're going to make some money out of this. I mean, they see it as a property relationship. However much they love the music, they might like the people involved and respect them. Nearly always, they're pushed into seeing it as a commodity that they have to sell. And I mean, we're very opposed to seeing any of the people that we deal with, any of the music that we sell, simply as a commodity.
Rough Trade take their anti-commercial principles into the recording studio. It's not just lack of resources that make them choose to record in the basement of a terraced house. They make do-it-yourself records in a homemade studio as a matter of policy.
Hello, Mike. How are you? Hello. Hello. This is Studio One.
Seeing how much altitude we can risk it.
We like to make records in someone's living room. Because if you take people that haven't previously existed in a very luxurious environment and put them in a very expensive studio surrounded with huge amounts of technology and professional people, they're intimidated by it.
Hey, hello folks. How do you fancy just having a quick recording of Supermarket?
Right.
And then,
We're looking
and then we can have a listen to it, all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Looking forward.
Right, so it's rolling.
Is it rolling, Bob? Come on. It's rolling. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Usually you're confronted with a situation where the engineer plumps himself in the middle and you've got to try and find some place where you can listen to it. You don't have, like access to it. You can't change the way things sound. You have to ask, and you have a chain of command. It just sets up a whole set of relationships that are very difficult to break. And here it's easier to get at it, if you like. The access is greater.
We're not Luddites. I mean, we don't smash up machinery and go back to, the 17th century, but we feel happy learning about the technical process with a technical, a board in front of us that we can understand, that we can learn on. Being a producer, I mean, all it means is that you give your musical ideas. You say, well, I hear it like this. It sounds like this to me. It would sound better as so-and-so. I mean, it's a job that anyone that's listening to music seriously could do.
Sounds okay. It's okay. It's a bit treble.
Too trivial.
Yeah. It's a bit scratchy. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Especially on the long note, it sounds a bit sort of...
Okay.
It's a bit like a wire.
The studio is where music becomes product, where sounds are linked to sales. But the sound of Rough Trade Records is raw and uncomfortable, even deliberately unpleasant. They refuse to use studio techniques to make their groups easy on the ear.
Sandy Pearlman has said quite, plainly, the reason that he produced the Clash the way that he did was because he wanted them to be heard in America. And if they were not produced in a certain way, then the American ears just would not hear it. It's like they're closed. And I think, that's wrong. It is a mistaken way of approaching the problem.
You see, what everyone thinks is if you don't do that, then all you're doing is cutting off your chance to survive in the marketplace. And that's one of the things that we're fighting against. We're saying the marketplace is a false creation and has very little to do with the reality of what people might want given the options. Now, I suppose in a way we're incredibly egotistical about it. I mean, we measure the success of a Rough Trade record by how happy the band are with what's being produced in the recording studio, what they've done, and how happy everyone at Rough Trade is. I mean, if we were all convinced it was good and the rest of the world thought it was lousy, we'd probably be quite happy to stay in our insane asylum alone.
Small record companies have always taken risks on music that is not commercial. Rough Trade is supporting Robert Rental and The Normal, who've made records but are still experimenting at home with their synthesizers and tapes. This music has no obvious audience, but Rough Trade ignore record company wisdom about what people want to hear. They package their tour so that people who'd come to see Stiff Little Fingers will be forced to listen to unfamiliar music. reception could have been hostile, but the atmosphere was usually good-natured interest. These impassive technicians were, after all, a suitably alienating setting for the real stars of the show.
1, 2, 3, 4. I say, what you say. Nothing to do, none of me. There's no place to show. There's no time, there's no place to go. We are nowhere left to go. Take my hand to the earth. Gonna go, we have some fun. Put us down and go, and we run. Every time they sing the same old song. And we are know, baby, that's where we belong. Don't tell me what to do. Look at me, I don't know what to do. Just now, okay, we say. I'm only wonder what the future will bring. Just be pop. I nowhere left to go. I nowhere left to go.
And in a way, we're sort of almost a paradigm of the way Rough Trade hoped to operate. We started off, recorded our own first single just on an 8-track studio. 500 copies was all we could afford to press. And we found them selling ridiculously fast. I got in touch with Rough Trade through a guy who makes badges. And they started to sell copies of that single for us. And then when it came to the second single, they asked us could they pay the costs and so forth and go into it on a joint venture. And from there we ended up doing an album which of course made the top 20. And at the moment we're considering just continuing that way because it's on a straight 50-50 partnership. But it's, you know, like do-it-yourself records time. It's really interesting.
You're more in contact with them, you know, whereas a big record company, you have to make appointments to see the Mr. and Mr., you know, so-and-so. And with Rough Trade, you can walk in and just sit down and sort of talk to them.
They can offer us more money, which is strange to say. If we signed for CBS tomorrow, all the kids on the street would say, what a sellout. And the chances are very good. Our share of record sales would be at most a half of what we're making at the moment, because they give us what is tantamount to complete control. When you can write the best contract in the world, and sooner or later a big record company is going to find a way out of it.
Right. I don't know how many of you out there are actually thinking of joining pop groups. For those of you who are, and especially for all the A&R men that got in on the guest list tonight, this is for you. Oh, and our own record company, who is not about honest. This is called Rough Trade. My life. And you still there, you're running off this fucking war. Think that you won, but remember this is our work. We'll do it our way, make it our own. We found people to trust, people to universe. Won't be betrayed, be betrayed no more. No lies no more.
The strength of Stiff Little Fingers music lies in its direct account of working-class teenage life. Now they're becoming pop stars with a pop star way of life. They are not ordinary kids anymore.
Why can't you tell us the truth? Why can't you tell us the truth? Why can't you tell us the truth?
The Fingers seem better prepared to cope with the dilemmas of success than Rough Trade's intellectuals. The danger is that Rough Trade will merely service the record business, will take the musical risks that the established companies cash in on. An even greater danger is that they will go the way of other small labels before them and become an established company themselves.
we have decided to actually limit the space and also limit the amount of people who are going to work. I think somewhere around a dozen is about the maximum where you can maintain any kind of integrity within the system. And if in the long run that means that there are certain large-scale projects which we can't do, then obviously they'll have to go.
If we don't respond in some sense to the growth of our bands by a certain amount of growth, all it means is that we will be a nursery ground for every major label that exists in this country. And it doesn't seem in the long run as though that's a very good idea, because all it means is that you give the band a chance to live out their ideals for a few years, and then they go and join, a corporation, and I mean, whatever happens up to them after that, will happen, and it's very debatable whether that's good or bad. We think it's bad.
Well, I mean, I don't think anything will be as angry as the Inflammable Material album. I can't see it. I don't think it could be. How can we get as angry about things that are going to happen to us here, as you could about seeing your friend killed, or walking down the street and sort of, going to a pub that you've known for years and sort of getting there to find it's not there anymore. I mean, God knows how many people were killed in its disappearance. Obviously the songs won't be as angry. We hope they certainly won't be any less relevant. I don't think they will be.
I mean, someone gets up on stage, they're expressing some summation of their experiences and their art. I mean, whether they've learned it recently or whether they've just hit upon some way of presenting it. And that's what often makes people's work in the first couple of years of their life as artists very, very interesting. And then after that, as far as I can see, the way that it's set up, they're treated as artists, separate from society. And when they do that, they start to find themselves in a very unreal world. And what we want to try is put our ideas into practice in a real society.